welcome back to the channel. We got a fun article today. 16 phrases older people use that others don't get. If you've ever spoken to someone older and felt like you were speaking another language, just know that you're not alone. Older generations have a bunch of sayings that tend to confuse younger people because these phrases come from different times when life wasn't like it is now. Here are 16 phrases that older people use that nobody else gets. First on the list, don't take any wooden nickels. It's no secret that older people are cautious with their money, and this carefulness is where we get the saying, don't take any wooden nickels. Anyone who says it is warning you not to let anyone rip you off. Wooden nickels used to be fake coins that held no value, and that's where this saying came from, despite the fact that wooden nickels aren't a thing anymore. The saying has stuck around as a warning to people of all ages to be a little more mindful. The next saying on the list is, drop a dime on him. When someone drops a dime on another person, they're snitching or reporting them, and it's usually to the authorities. The phrase comes from a time when payphone calls cost a dime. You'd use that coin to make a call and tip someone off. Although this phrase is harder to understand these days because payphones are rather rare now, it's enough to make some younger people confused as to what money has to do with telling on someone. The next phrase on the list is film at 11. The phrase film at 11 is one that older people use to suggest that more information is coming later, and it came from a time when TV news would tease a story during the day. They'd then tell the viewers that they could see the full coverage on the 11 p.m. broadcast. But today's around-the-clock news and instant updates mean that waiting for a specific time to get the news seems rather old-fashioned. The next phrase on the list is the bees are in the clover. Older people sometimes use the saying the bees are in the clover to describe those times when everything's going just great. Bees love clover fields because they're full of nectar. As such, the saying is meant to suggest that life is sweet and prosperous, although it may confuse younger people who aren't familiar with rural sayings. They probably have no idea about the connection between clover fields, bees, and sheer happiness. The next phrase on the list is in like Flynn. Saying in like Flynn means that you have managed to achieve something easily or were successful without much effort, and the phrase is associated with Errol Flynn. He was a famous actor from the 1930s and 40s who became known for his swashbuckling roles, and charm. His name doesn't ring a bell with anyone. To younger people, the phrase might seem a bit random, but it's simply meant to suggest that everything's going well. The next phrase on today's list is heavens to Betsy. A lot of younger people hear the phrase heavens to Betsy and feel confused since it makes them wonder who Betsy and what's going on. But really, it's just a fun way of saying oh wow or expressing surprise. There's no actual Betsy involved. It's just a colorful way to show your surprise without cussing. Older people tend to drop this line when they're happily surprised or even a little startled, even though younger people might not get it. The next phrase on today's list is straighten up and fly right. When someone tells you to straighten up and fly right, they're trying to subtly tell you to get your act together, and it's essentially a way of saying you should start behaving properly. They want you to make better choices. This saying became popular thanks to a Nat King Cole song from the 1940s and is a catchy way for older people to encourage better habits without coming off as too bossy. The next phrase on today's list is 23 scadoo. You may have been told to 23 scadoo before and had no idea what it meant. It's simply used to signal that it's time to leave or make a swift exit. Back in the early 1900s, it was a popular bit of slang that made goodbyes rather interesting, although it's less common to hear it these days. Perhaps we should bring this one back because I'd certainly make our conversations a little bit more unique. The next phrase on today's list is "see you in the funny papers." Speaking of leaving, some older people will wave and say "see you in the funny papers" when someone's heading out, which is a reference to times when newspaper comic strips were a big deal. The majority of young people today get the news from social media or apps rather than newspapers, so this saying might be lost on them. But really, even if it's not as common a sign-off, there's something so nostalgic about this phrase. The next phrase on today's list is "what's the skinny?" Asking "what's the skinny" is an old school way of saying "what's up?" or "tell me the news," with the skinny referring to the inside scoop or the juicy details. This phrase hasn't completely fallen out of fashion, but younger people usually use something like "what's the scoop?" or "spill the tea" instead. One thing's clear, we love using food and drinks as a metaphor to talk about gossip, no matter what generation you're in. The next phrase on today's list is "he's on the horn." Hearing someone say "he's on the horn" isn't as exciting as it might seem, as it just means that the other person is talking on the phone. The phrase comes from the early days of telephones. In that time, telephones had a horn-shaped part for listening and speaking, which may seem rather unbelievable to younger people these days. You can't imagine a telephone being anything like that. The next phrase on today's list is "got your ears lowered." You might hear the saying "got your ears lowered" when you get a fresh haircut, but don't worry, because there's nothing to be annoyed about. They're simply making a light-hearted comment about your new look and trying to acknowledge that you had a trim. Essentially, they're saying that with less hair, your ears seem a bit lower. It's all in good fun. The next phrase on today's list is "back to the salt mines." On Sunday evening, you may hear an older person sigh and say something like "back to the salt mines" as they prepare to go back to the office on Monday. This saying dates back to when working in salt mines was brutally hard work, and it's meant to suggest that someone is returning to work that they don't particularly enjoy. These days, it's more of a tongue-in-cheek way that older people use to complain about having to get back to the daily grind. The next phrase on today's list is "I'll be there with bells on." When you invite your grandma to your graduation, she beams and says, "I'll be there with bells on." She's not planning to jingle or anything, it's that she's expressing her excitement to attend, and she might even come a little dressed up. Many young people don't get the same because it comes from a time when people drove wagons. When they were stuck, the person who rescued them would actually ask for some bells as their compensation. The next saying on today's list is "close but no cigar." Back in the day, people used to smoke a lot more openly than they do now, and you could even win a cigar as a prize at a certain fairground games. That's how we got the saying "close but no cigar." It's supposed to acknowledge that someone came really close to winning, but didn't make it this time, although younger people might not get that. They tend to smoke vapes and regular cigarettes, so they may not understand the reference to cigars. The next saying on today's list is "don't sell me a dog." An older person might tell you "don't sell me a dog" when you tell them a story, and that's their way of asking you not to try to fool them. In the past, dishonest sellers sometimes tried to pass off a worthless dog as something special. So this phrase became a way of saying you're not going to fall for any tall tales. You'd have to try a lot harder than that to fool an older person. Alright, there you have it. 16 phrases older people use that others don't get. Do you hear any of these phrases in your everyday life? Does your grandma say something like that maybe? Put it in the comment section if you ever hear any of these phrases. I'd be interested to hear from you. And if you enjoyed this video, please take a second to hit that like button. That'll help get it in front of a few more eyes. You can go ahead and hit that big thumbs up like button now. And of course, if you really enjoy this sort of content, consider subscribing to the channel.